A very interesting survey reveals developers' thoughts on Nintendo Switch as we move through the months of 2018. What's going on, everybody? It's Zach from Switchforce. Gabe is here, and ahead of the March Game Developers Conference 2018, they released their annual State of the Game Industry survey. This polls a whole bunch of developers and gets a sense of how they feel about the current games, the current game systems, and just the current state of the games industry as a whole. Last year, the numbers were a little bit low for the Switch, and that's to be expected given the fact that the Switch released in March, GDC is in March, and so it makes sense. The good news is that the numbers have grown tremendously, but there's some interesting data points to pick out here.
Yeah, and some of this doesn't really make sense to me, right? I mean, look, to be a game developer, all you have to do is have some type of software in development, right? And obviously this is accounting for a bunch of very small companies that are probably just making phone games. So I feel like the numbers are kind of followed by an asterisk in my opinion because of that. But
absolutely,
Nintendo Switch being so low, I don't think this is the full story, if we're being honest. I think that there's way more to this.
For sure. I just think it's interesting to note that they are grabbing a hold of the Switch as we'd hoped, and then we can touch on why not as much as maybe we predicted. So last year, 3% of surveyed developers were working on a Switch project. That's a very small number. That has quadrupled to 12% in 2018, and 15% of all devs surveyed expect their next game to be for Switch. Now, I thought that was a pretty cool number, right? 15% say their next game will be on Switch, 12% are currently working on Switch, but in the grand scheme of a 100% pie, it's not a lot. 1 in 3 developers now think the Switch is the most interesting console, which sounds good, but then the other 2/3 don't believe that, which is kind of strange. So there's a whole lot of other things we could discuss in terms of, VR and whatnot, but I want to jump down to this chart here. What platforms are you currently working on or anticipating working on a game for? PC is number 1, which is to be expected, I guess.
No surprise, yeah.
Smartphones, half that, number 2. PlayStation 4, though, 3. Xbox One, 4. Mac, 5. VR, 6. Switch, 7? Switch is only beating out augmented reality, web browser, and Linux. Now, they surveyed 4,000 developers, most of whom they say are from North American studios. Again, we have no clue if this is, everybody at Activision and, freaking Naughty Dog and Nintendo, or if this is people from indie, garage studios or mobile houses or what. But I find it concerning that Switch is below Mac and VR.
Look, Mac, I feel a little bit better about, right? Because it's so tied to the PC ecosystem, and Steam really is what it comes down to. There's a lot of games on PC, on Steam, that just also release on Mac. So that one we can kind of tie together. I think the real telling thing is, Xbox One being at 26%, Switch being at 12%. Xbox gets literally everything, right? Monster Hunter World is a good example, a game that's releasing this week in a very big franchise that isn't coming to Switch, and Capcom has, said over and over again, hey, World isn't coming to Switch. At some point, we will get Monster Hunter on Switch. It's just not now. So I guess the question just becomes, who are these 4,000 people?
Right, exactly. And we have no way to determine who they are, and maybe it's just a strange group. I just fully expected Switch to be higher on the chart, especially given the indie bonanza that we see on Switch. They're pushing 600-700 games. That number grows daily. We have so many releases weekly, so many surprise stealth releases weekly, and yet 12% are currently or anticipating, or 12% are currently, 15% are anticipating develop, and only 1 in 3 think it's the coolest console. So here's my gut take. I think the kind of developer that goes to GDC probably is more into the big AAA project, and maybe that's where this kind of gets a little bit jumbled. Also, the smartphone PC market clearly runs the table, which I guess maybe is counter to what I just said. But the fact that PS4 and Xbox One are up there so high leads me to believe that this is much more of a AAA developer publishing house-centric event, and therefore the survey is centered around them, which brings us to our next little topic are third parties not embracing Switch as much as we think? Because we do know that there's a lot of third-party support for Switch in 2018, and we have cool releases like Dark Souls Remastered. We've got, the upcoming Wolfenstein 2. Only 12%, whether they're small developers or big developers, only 12% are currently working on Switch titles, whereas 30 on PS4, 26 on Xbox, and the one that weirds me out the most is why is VR gaining more piece of the pie than Switch? That just doesn't even make logical sense.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder, and this is kind of backtracking a little bit to an earlier part in our conversation, right? But, who's here? Naughty Dog, right? So let's say, 5 people from Naughty Dog are part of the 4,000 that are being questioned here. So Naughty Dog obviously isn't working on anything Switch. So that automatically kind of like inflates those things. And like you said, maybe it is much more of a like really hardcore people, like people that work on PUBG. Maybe like, look, the way I see it is third party is obviously growing on Switch. The support, I mean, like that's just as clear as day. There's a ton more games coming. So I don't know about these like percentages. And I also don't know if like this small sample size of developers is necessarily indicative of what like the industry as a whole is doing.
Oh yeah, it's got to be taken with a grain of salt. But the other numbers do seem to make sense, and that's where I do think it gains a few more grains. Like for example, they point out that 1 in 10 developers say they're working on a game that includes paid loot boxes. VR has dropped in interest, but a lot of people still have faith in it, as evidenced by not only 71% of them saying as much, but 19% currently working on that project. I also wonder if the North American focus plays a part as well.
Yeah, and I hate to take this here, but I also just look, if I'm going to GDC and I'm handed a questionnaire or like there's a poll, like how serious are they even taking this thing? Like how, again, we don't know.
If you're asked what kind of game you're working on, I feel like that's a pretty easy thing to address, right?
Sure, but I mean,
let's talk about this. Which platform most interests you as a developer right now? PC, 59%, PlayStation 4, 39%, Nintendo Switch, 36%. So to me, that feels better because they said 1 in 3 say it's the most interesting. That's a little bit less clear. When you actually look at this numerical chart, Switch is right below PS4 as the most interesting platform to develop for. So now that gets you a little bit more oomph, right? Xbox One is down at 28%. Switch is above VR. Switch is even above smartphones and tablets at 36, only below PC, which is going to win no matter what, and PS4, which, given its install base and just the dominance of that console, makes perfect sense. Switch is 3% below, with a far smaller user base, with a much smaller sample size of games and years. That, I think, is much more exciting.
Yeah, and honestly, these numbers don't make me feel a type of way about Nintendo Switch at all. It's obvious that the momentum is there and it's only trending in one direction. Everybody's getting behind it, and maybe with the introduction of these more family friendly things in the shape of Labo, that brings on more developers, right? Because mobile phones are very, very popular, as we can see here. And my mother, who doesn't play video games at all, is constantly playing games on her phone. So if you can bring people like that in with the Switch, it's a little bit of a tougher sell because you don't have the Switch with you at all times like the phone. If you bring in those people, I believe Switch only becomes more and more successful. But I definitely don't think we have anything to worry about. I think the force is strong with Switch.
You heard it here first. The force is strong with Switch. And that leaves me to ask you, how do you feel about this data? Does it bother you at all? Are you slightly concerned that only 12% of developers are currently developing a Switch game, or do you think that it still is in a state that focused development and specifically targeted studios are who are working on Switch projects, and so this isn't just like a free-for-all in the form of everybody has a PS4 dev kit, everybody can develop for PC. I wonder if that plays a part in this as well. We know that there are a plethora of indie titles coming, so I'm surprised that didn't show up more in this survey, but nonetheless, it's interesting to see. I think the most positive thing to take away from this is that Switch is right up there with PS4 as the most interesting and exciting platform for developers to work on. You can take the other numbers as you will, but let us know how you approach this GDC survey in the comments down below. Hopefully there's some interesting things. Last year we got some really cool stuff out of GDC from Nintendo, including the early look at Link's motorbike, which ended up being a part of the Champions Ballad DLC, so who knows what they'll discuss this year. I would love to see some sort of Mario Odyssey retrospective. Don't know if that's in the works at all. Probably not, but it would be grand. And as we wait for Balloon World, thank you so much for watching. A fantastic day. Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all the latest and greatest from the Switch and surveys like this. We love our surveys, and we're going to survey you by saying, hey, want to follow us on Twitter? It's twitter.com/theswitchforce. Link is in the description below. We'd love to have you over there. We're tweeting a lot more. We got polls, we got pictures, we got people, and we just need you. So until that time, everybody, thanks again. Fantastic day for myself and Gabe. Switch Force, out.